way that the Western academic tradition should have sunk so low that that was even in question. Anyway, I have anecdotal evidence, and I thought that was one of the most wonderful experiences I had on that kind of walk, because that woman had no time at all. From the moment she saw me to the moment that she expressed this concern that I was walking in that weather without a hat. It wasn't, something she thought she should say, or was a kind thing to say. It's natural, spontaneous response to seeing me, a strange figure on the road. So this is my anecdotal evidence for the existence of altruism. And I think that anecdotal evidence is not given the weight that it deserves. And there is such a thing as overwhelming anecdotal evidence. It seems to me often people in scientific community or some way affiliated with scientific community tend to use anecdotal evidence simply as a way just to brush away ideas and theories and phenomena which don't agree with their understanding. Anyway, the Buddha was someone who definitely believed in the potential for altruism. And the Buddha's teachings are Sanditiko teachings. This is a Pali word, which means they are verifiable. And this is an extremely important point to bear in mind. In most faith-based traditions, you have a choice to believe in unverifiable dogmas or to reject them. That's it. There's not a third choice. In Buddha Dhamma, we have teachings which are observations that can be taken, should be taken as working hypothesis. So in a faith-based, belief-based tradition, the enemy is doubt. And in Buddha Dhamma, doubt can be a positive thing. It can also be a negative thing, what we call a hindrance, but not necessarily. So the Kalama people said to the Buddha, we're confused. All these really articulate, charismatic teachers come through our town. Every one of them is so convincing. And yet everyone contradicts the other one. How can we determine, what criteria can we use to determine which teachers are reliable and which are not? And the Buddha praised the Kalama people. He said, very good, you are doubting. You have doubt in something which is appropriate to doubt. So when we realize we don't have the necessary information that we need to make a good decision, doubt is an intelligent response. It's not a problem. With the proviso that that doubt leads to action. So the doubt that the Buddha criticized or revealed as a defilement or something that muddies the mind is the doubt that leads to inaction. And that kind of doubt is most often the result of a wish, desire to have cast iron guarantees that what you're about to do will have the results that you hope it does before you make the commitment of time and effort. And of course that's not possible. Any endeavor, whether it's a worldly or a spiritual endeavor, involves a certain amount of risk. And if you want a risk-free endeavor, you'll end up not doing anything at all and just going around in frustrated circles. So the Buddha distinguished between doubt, which leads to action, which is the intelligent response to a lack of the information you need to make a decision, and the doubt that comes from having unrealistic expectations of guarantees of success before you start off on a path. So the Buddha's teachings we can divide into two main areas. One area is the way things are. And the second area, or the second part of the teachings, this like two-pronged teaching, is what human beings should do about it, or how we should relate to the way things are. The Buddha was often asked to categorize his teachings, and they had these like forms to fill out, you know, in those not forms, written forms, but like a set number of questions. And people go around and ask all the teachers, what's your position? Is it what happens to an enlightened person after they die? Do they disappear forever? Are they reborn? Are they both reborn and not reborn? Are they neither born nor... This is kind of Indian character, liking things like that. Far more complicated than in the West. In the West you have very simple to be or not to be. In India it's to be or not to be, or both to be and to be, not be and neither to be nor not to be. So very sophisticated culture even 2,500 years ago. So the Buddha would always refuse to answer these questions. But he did on one occasion say, my religion is or my teaching is a teaching of effort. It's characterized by the importance it gives to individual effort. And what's that effort? The effort is to prove the veracity, the truth of the teachings as a direct experience. Earlier today I was giving a talk and saying I found the idea of a university course in applied Buddhism somewhat humorous, in that to me there's no such thing as unapplied Buddhism. If it's not applied, then it's not Buddhism. It's just one and the same thing. And the Buddha said the teaching is the teaching of effort. So in a faith-based religion, where the assumption or the belief is that your life is decided or influenced by forces outside of you, then you are led to respond to that or to relate to that teaching, usually through ceremonies, sacrifices, or prayers. But in the Buddha's teachings, the Buddha makes a statement that our happiness, our suffering, our existence as human beings is a function of understanding of our own human nature and the world we live in. So the path, or the spiritual path, in one family of religions is from doubt to unshakable faith in dogmas. In Buddhism, it's moving from avijja, or lack of understanding, to full understanding. This is why I call it like a path of education. The Buddha's teaching, which is gathered in the Eightfold Path, that Eightfold Path is usually telescoped into 3 sikha. So these are the training of conduct, the training of the heart or the emotions, and the training of wisdom and understanding. And it's not a step-by-step process. These 3 different aspects are cultivated together in harmony. But the word that I use there, training or sikha, is also the word we use for education. So it's an education of our conduct, an education of our emotions, an education of our understanding of life. This is the spiritual path. And so the Buddha giving us verifiable statements about the way life is and the causes and conditions of suffering and the causes and conditions of happiness. So this is not an intellectual endeavor, because we are human beings who are subject to old age, sickness and death, and we aspire to happiness, and we do not want to suffer. So given that that human reality, then I would say we don't have any choice but to put these teachings to the test. So that idea that human beings have the capacity, have the potential, can put the teachings of the religious leader to the test of their own experience and decide for themselves whether or not they stand up to that kind of examination. This absolutely revolution in religion, religious thought, it just gives so much respect to the student. And we can see, I think, that if we are sincere in our refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, we have no choice but to apply the teachings to our life. So if the Buddha says you can abandon greed, hatred and delusion, then it's not enough to simply say, yeah, that makes sense, well, that's a really inspiring teaching, I could do that, if I wasn't so busy doing other things. No, you say, that has got to lie at the very heart of my life as a Buddhist, whether you're a monk or a nun or a lay Buddhist. The effort is not a sign of pride or willfulness or lack of humility, but it is expected of you. And the Buddha went so far as to say that if somebody tries to take his teachings and apply them and put them into practice, then he is or she is worshipping the Buddha. This is called Bhattipati Puja. It's like he said you can worship, you can show respect and reverence to the Buddha with flowers and incense and so on, but that is in no way comparable to showing reverence to the Buddha by trying to follow his teachings. So the Buddha says we suffer in life because we don't understand life. We understand life because we don't see it, and we don't see it because we don't look. So Buddhist practice is developing the capacity to look and to learn from our life. It's as simple as that. And although the teachings are verifiable by nature, that doesn't mean they're verifiable to everyone. There are teachings which are very subtle and profound and are only verifiable by people who have developed and cultivated their mind to a very high degree. But there are also teachings which we can verify from the very moment that we receive them or we hear them for the first time. I'll give you an example. The teaching of dana, generosity, giving. So why is that given such a central role? Or cynics might say, well, yeah, this is the monks, they want the lay people to look after them, so they tell the lay people, you make so much merit if you give me food every day. But I don't believe that's the case. And when we look at the Buddhist path, it's a path of relinquishment, a path of giving up all that holds us down, all that constricts us, all that sullies the mind, and causes distress to the mind. But many of these, patience is a virtue. Problem is that a lot of things which are most harmful to us, we don't really want to let go of. We kind of like them. They have a charm to them. And to develop the power of relinquishment and letting go, you start off with the coarsest expression of attachment and possessiveness, and that's your possessiveness and attachment to the material world. So you're developing a habit, and you're observing, you're learning. And what do you see? You see when you give, when you share, makes you feel good. It's not frightening. And it's something that you can feel proud of. Because our sense of who we are is influenced to a great deal by how we behave. Every time you give, you strengthen the perception in your mind, I am a giver. And associated with that is the sense, I have something to give. So when I was first living in northeast Thailand, in forest monasteries in the late 1970s, people were really poor, certainly by Western standards. And nobody had any money. Nobody even, I can remember talking to villagers, they didn't even know what a bank account is or was. And yet there was a great deal of happiness. And I'm certainly not kind of romanticizing poverty here. Some areas, parts of their life were difficult, but they had a joy about them. And they certainly had no resentment and anger at being poor or things that it was like unfair. It was just, well, it's like this. But one of the things that contributed to their mental health was the ceremony or the ritual of alms round. So every morning, first thing in the morning, about 6 a.m., we'd walk into the village and there would be people outside the houses waiting for us. And the first thing that people would do in the village, get up early in the morning, first thing you do, maybe after a little bit of chanting or meditation, hopefully, people would boil rice, make rice, put some rice on a plate, or maybe they have the katip, the holder, sticky rice. You got it on a plate, you see how many monks are here today. You got a big lump of sticky rice, 4 monks, so you make like 4. And then people start the day seeing people who are given their whole life to spiritual values, who are exemplars and teachers and reminders of the spiritual values they aspire to in their lives, and they give to them, and they contribute to their life. And they start off the day with an act of generosity and reminding themselves, I may be poor, but I'm a giver. And everyone, even though cash poor, the villagers were rice rich. Everyone had rice. And everyone can share rice. So this act of giving is not an inconsequential thing. You can say, well, what's just a small lump of sticky rice? What's the meaning of that? Well, it's cultivating the spirit of generosity and the love of giving and love of sharing and experiencing the joy that comes from that. So as the spiritual path progresses and you're moving inwards and you're letting go of attachments to likes and dislikes and various kinds of negative emotions in particular, you have that confidence to do that because of this cultivation of generosity. So this whole path is so beautiful, and so how each part of it, from the most humble to the most profound, has this interlocking and profound. One thing don't let go of is the microphone. Okay. Where was I? Okay. So, dana and its relationship to the path. Now, here again we have an observation. We can give and share with a desire for some reward. It can be a physical reward, some material reward, it could be reputation, it could be respect, it could be love, could be anything. That when you give something with desire for something, anything in return, notice how your mind records that act. What I mean by that is, if you look back on some occasion in your past where you did give something, whether it was some material donation or some time and effort, but you did it because you wanted something in return. When you recall that, how does it feel? And I would suggest you feel kind of neutral, because your brain or your mind recorded that as a transaction. That's what you remember, a transaction. Even if what you did had very good results and helped other people and so on, but emotionally and in your memory, it's a memory of a transaction. Now, if you have given something, even a very small and modest gift, and you did that without any hope of any kind of, you didn't even want anybody to know about it, like secret goodness. In Thailand, we have very beautiful idiom for this. So in Thailand, if any of you have been there, you may have observed people put gold leaf on the Buddhas. It's a way of making merit. And everybody wants to put their bit of gold leaf on the front of the Buddha. So doing the secret goodness in Thailand is called putting the gold leaf on the back of the Buddha, where nobody can see it. Okay. So if you've done that, and I'm sure you have, now recall sometime when you did some good thing without any hope for reward. How does it feel? You feel good. You feel proud. You can feel some joy. And the amazing thing is, this is not time-bound. It doesn't fade. A year or so ago, I was giving a talk on this topic in Canada, Vancouver. And my host that night was an elderly gentleman. I say that, he's only a few years older than me, but he was very, very kind and devoted Buddhist. And we were driving back to his house, and he said, I was very moved by your talk this evening. I want to tell you my own experience. He said, I was 16 years old. Now I'm 72. So I was 16 years old. I had my first car, and I was so proud of this car, and I was driving it around. And I drove past a small boy. He was sitting by the side of the road crying. And I stopped the car and asked him, what's wrong? And he had been sent to the shop to buy some milk by his mother. And in those days, in the West, milk was sold in bottles. And on the way back, he tripped, fallen over, and the bottle of milk had broken. He lost all the milk. And he was afraid to go home. He was afraid his mum would be angry and would punish him for his carelessness. So this gentleman said, get in my car. And he took him to the shop and bought him a pint of milk and then drove him home. He said, you know, Ajahn, that I was 16, now I'm 72. I only have to think of that and I've got tears in my eye. I just feel that's one of the most wonderful things, you know, in my mind, in my heart. This is what we call spiritual treasure. And this kind of spiritual treasure, nobody can steal it. Nobody can take it away from you. You've got money in the bank, you've got Bitcoin, you've got anything, you know, it's not a sure thing. But you've got spiritual treasures in your heart that you've accumulated through acts of goodness and kindness with no expectation of reward. And you have some beautiful thing within you. And people will often ask me or ask other Buddhist monks, how do you comfort, how do you help someone at the very end of their life if they have never had any interest in spiritual matters, never meditated? They may never have meditated, but they've done good things. So you encourage them to remember something. It doesn't have to be something big and spectacular and special. Simply something, helping a little boy's bottle of milk is broken. And you remember, if that person can remember it at the end of their life, their mind will be filled with joy and that joy can be their meditation object. So this is, meditation is often presented in a way that I think is rather narrow, and we think it's like this special technique that you apply in order to get a result. But it's much broader than that, and the possibility of choice of meditation objects is much broader than you might think. And simply bringing to mind the memory of goodness that you have performed in the past can bring you great joy, and that joy can be the meditation object, which will take you beyond the hindrances. Sila, also, if you keep the 5 precepts with wisdom and understanding, and that's important. So, Buddhist precepts, first of all, has to be voluntary. If you were to refrain from hurting and killing somebody and any kind of violence simply because you're afraid of going to jail, going to prison, or being criticized, that would be better than being cruel and violent, for sure, but it's not sila in the Buddhist meaning of that term. Because sila only arises when you have right view, and that means you understand very clearly the suffering inherent in breaking a precept and the value of keeping it. And it's not only that, if you keep precepts and you start thinking you're better than someone who doesn't keep precepts, your sila is undermined. Your sila is no longer pure. This is a very interesting idea of purity. It's not just a matter of you don't do those things, but it's how you hold yourself and how you relate to that purity of conduct. So the advantages of sila, first of all, it's not easy to keep sila. And you can only keep sila if you're also cultivating qualities like mindfulness and patience and loving kindness and reflecting on your actions. And so it involves every other aspect of the practice as well. But the result that we can see immediately is self-respect. So I'm visiting Western countries. It's a big, interesting topic of self-esteem. And for those scholars amongst you, all of the scholars, study the history of self-esteem. It has a history, and only a very recent history, and a corrupt history, to do with Californian politics. But I don't have time to talk. You can find about that yourself. But people say, what's the Buddhist idea of self-esteem? And I said, well, we have idea of self-respect. And self-respect comes primarily, to begin with, through dana and sila. If you are offering dana and sharing and helping others, you have this sense of being a giver. You're not, the prey. You're not the lowest of the low. You're not bad person. You're not. You have something to contribute, something to give. And keeping precepts, it means with all the pressures and the temptations and the opportunities to break precepts, you are able to navigate your life and all its challenges without breaking any of those precepts. That gives you a sense of self-respect. And you start to feel more friendly towards yourself. And this, of course, connects with the idea of metta, and that we start off by developing metta for ourselves. And many people these days, particularly in the West, say they can't do that. But if you're offering dana and you're practicing precepts, you have a very good basis for developing metta towards yourself. It comes naturally. So in terms of meditation objects, recollection of sila is also a meditation object. It's called silanusati. It's in one of the traditional 40 meditation topics, but one which is not taught very much. But if you've been keeping precepts and you sit with your eyes closed and you go through your first precept number 1, and you go through occasionally, in the last day or the last week or the last month, if you say, no, I have not killed, not harmed a single being, not a single mosquito, not a single ant, no volitional, not harm to any other being, joy arises. Never taken anything that's not given, never cheated on partner, never lied, never taken alcohol or drugs which cloud your judgment and your wisdom. You can go over these 5 precepts systematically. Then these discursive meditations where you have, rather than meditating on a particular physical sensation or idea, or sweeping through the body, like Gantoikas teaches, you're allowing your mind to think, but thinking within very clearly defined boundaries. And so the discipline is to keep your mind within those boundaries. So in that kind of discursive meditation, you need to work out beforehand what points that you're going to reflect on. Of course, with the 5 precepts, that's very easy. They're already numbered for you. And you can go 1, and then when you run out of things to think about 1, you go to 2, then to 3, and then 1 to 4, and to 5, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Or you can go 1 to 2, and then back to 1, and then back to 2, and then on to 3, and then back. So there are various ways that you can develop this. But again, as you reflect in that way, you'll come to a point where your mind becomes wearied of thinking. And then you can turn to the joy which has arisen from that reflection as your meditation object, or you can go on to a non-discursive meditation object, such as the breath. So it's a very good foundational practice. If you're living a very busy life, where you have to use your thinking mind a lot, switching from that straight into a non-discursive meditation can be very frustrating, particularly for those first beginning. And the discursive meditations, where you're allowing your mind to think, but in a systematic way within clearly defined boundaries with a specific goal in mind, then that can be a very good alternative and a very good way to lead into the more profound non-verbal meditation. So this is an example of how teachings of the Buddha was that it's not like a step-by-step process, that everything informs everything else. And again, returning to the topic of sila and the voluntary nature of sila, sila is taking the Buddha's teachings on the way things are and our capacity as human beings and putting it to the test. So the Buddha points out that we can, as an act of will, refrain from certain kinds of actions or speech. So we can cultivate the intention to refrain from hurting and harming, for example. But this is a key point. We cannot, as an act of will, decide not to have a negative emotion. So you can, I hope you do, decide, I will not harm anybody through my actions or speech. But you can't say, from this day onwards, I'm never going to want to hurt anybody. I'm never going to get angry. I'm just going to feel loving kindness and metta for everyone. That's what Buddhists are supposed to do. And I'm a Buddhist. You can't do that. It's not a practice which is based upon the way things are. This is a story. I mean, I was first really drawn to this point a long time ago. For those of you about my age, remember there was an American president called Jimmy Carter. He only just died recently. And he was elected as the sort of the opposite, the clean living nemesis of the very corrupt Richard Nixon. And during the electioneering, he was attacked as being a hypocrite. And people would say, you come across, you're a church-going person, you're very moral, and so on. Don't do all these bad things. and in an interview, he was asked point blank, have you ever committed adultery? And he said no, very, very plainly, without any, it was obviously true. Been married for 30 years or whatever, never committed adultery. And then he was asked the question, but have you ever wanted to? And he thought about it, and he said, yeah, I think. And that was the headline in all of the media in the following day, that he was a hypocrite, that he hadn't actually committed adultery, but he thought about it. Therefore, he wasn't truly a moral person. And from a Buddhist point of view, this seems so naive. I mean, obviously they're just looking for a way to criticize him, but just so ignorant of, human psychology and what you can and cannot do and what you can and cannot prevent yourself from doing. So precept doesn't mean that, you can never find anybody other than your partner physically attractive ever again. That's not the point. The point is whether or not you act upon that feeling and that perception. And that's where we take the standard of sila. And it's a workable standard. But because there are still, as they say, those desires that will come into the mind, they have to be dealt with using meditation practices and mindfulness practices. And it's not a quick fix, that takes time. Mindfulness, of course, is absolutely central here. And mindfulness is having that presence of mind, that you know what's going on in your body and your mind in real time. And you're observing all the time. So in the case of anger, for example, what is, I think, somewhat surprising is that physical arousal appears before the thinking. And if you observe, when you're starting to get a little bit irritated, there will be certain subtle changes taking place in your body, certain tightness. There are certain patterns of arousal. And if you can observe and remember them, it's an early warning system. So some people will feel it in their shoulders or in their arms, or everybody may be a little bit different. But you know if you have that feeling arising, this is the first step towards anger. And so you can nip it in the bud before it becomes a full-blown anger. And this is a mindfulness, being very sensitive to what's going on in your mind and your body, the changes that take place. And in the coarser emotions, which have very clear, defined physical counterparts, then observing the physical changes is timely and somewhat easier even. But the whole practice is of being awake. A meditation practice is not to get peaceful. Meditate to become peaceful or to realize peace is dangerous. Why? Because presumably you don't really understand what peace is until you've experienced it. And almost everyone will confuse peace with relaxation. So you're mindful and you weather these storms of agitation and the mind starts to calm down and relax, and you think, made it. And what happens as soon as you do that? You fall asleep. Because meditation is not to gain a particular state of mind, but it's to understand the nature of all states of mind. But before you can do that, you need a stability of consciousness, a stability of the mind, which is called samadhi. So what's the relationship between sati, or mindfulness, and samadhi? Mindfulness, samadhi, is a stream, an uninterrupted stream of mindfulness. So if you can sustain mindfulness, after a while, you can feel some changes. The mind becomes very solid and firm, mountain-like. And yet, and this doesn't really compute like on an intellectual basis, there is a gentleness and a softness. So you have these two things, and somehow they coexist. This absolute, like, unmovable characteristic together with the sense of calm and gentleness and brightness and joy and clarity. And this is all these kinds of aspects that arise in the mind. We give a name to that. We call it samadhi. That's not the goal of practice. But before we can penetrate the nature of our minds and body, then we need the mind to have that strength of samadhi. Because otherwise we cannot resist reacting to phenomena. And reacting to phenomena in its coarsest expression is, I like this, I don't like that. And like and dislike are dictators, aren't they? I mean, we feel like it's just normal and natural. It's something you like, you should do that. And we feel really kind of constricted and oppressed if we have to do something we don't like. And so these have very powerful forces in our minds in their most coarse expressions. But they also appear in more and more subtle expression. To the point in meditation, it's just the slightest tremor of the mind moving towards an experience we feel to be pleasant, and just slightly moving away from something which is unpleasant. And even that slightest movement towards or away from a phenomena prevents wisdom from arising. It's a Buddhist wisdom in the sense of seeing clearly and abandoning identification with phenomena as being me and mine. So samadhi is a stream of knowing. It's not the peace, and that'll come. Don't worry about that. But what the emphasis is on knowing, awareness. That's what meditation is about. It's about cultivating a stream of awareness. And all the meditation techniques are simply skillful means to enable that. The thing to beware of is enjoyment and indulgence in phenomena and reacting to phenomena blindly. And this is what samadhi purifies the mind of. And although in the academic Buddhist tradition, the meditation techniques are divided into this samatha and vipassana. Maybe you've heard about these. And so many arguments and discussions about these two terms over the centuries. But more simply, we can say samatha is look, and vipassana is see. You have to look first. You have to stop the mind first, allow it to see. And the mind has to have certain strength and clarity before you can see clearly. One of the beautiful similes to explain the two aspects of meditation, the calming, maturing process, it's called samatha, and the penetrative nature of meditation, which we call vipassana. It's been compared to an axe. So an axe to be a good axe or a good knife, you need two things. You need weight and a sharp blade. And the weight of the axe is comparable to samatha in all the ways that we cultivate this strength and clarity and joy in the mind and stability of the mind. And the sharpness of the axe is the vipassana. But it's just one axe. It's just one thing. It has to work together. So in certain stages of meditation, we're putting more emphasis on the clarification of awareness. And on certain stages, we're putting more emphasis into the investigation and looking into the nature of what's appearing before us, the five khandhas. So this is an education, it's a cultivation, it's one in which all these different aspects have to come together. And when you're on the level of sila, then the cultivation of the positive mental states, as I say, such as mindfulness and patience and the clear understanding of the reasoning and the value of precepts. These are the backups. So the intention to restrain is like the main actor on the stage, and the samadhi and panya are in the background, supporting. In the samadhi practice, then the sila is giving you that sense of absence of guilt and sense of well-being and self-respect, and the wisdom is understanding the nature of the wholesome and unwholesome dhammas and giving you the correct orientation for practice. On wisdom, you have the sila and the samadhi backing them up. So you can imagine these three actors, three aspects of the practice, and one of those three will be at the forefront, and the other two will be backups. And this will constantly be changing throughout the day or throughout even a meditation practice. So as you practice more and more, then you learn. And so samatha, what you can say, peace of mind or the clarity of samadhi, that's not yet wisdom, it's not yet vipassana. Nevertheless, it gives you a whole new perspective on sensual pleasures. You have an alternative to sensual pleasures that you never had before. And a lot of the grasping at sensual pleasures, even though you know that they're not really fulfilling and that it'll cause you a lot of pain in your life, you can't let them go. Why? Because you think even the most imperfect and flawed kind of pleasure is better than no pleasure at all. And you're afraid of no pleasure. And the only way you can overcome that hurdle, that obstacle, is having an inner happiness, which comes from development of samadhi. And that's what gives you the courage to let go of these more harmful, superficial kinds of pleasure. And then as the practice goes on, there's something arises is we call nibbida. And nibbida is kind of hard to explain, and the Thai word for it is unfortunately what means like bored, being bored, but disenchantment. Become disenchanted with defilements, disenchanted with greed and hatred and delusion. And you see that you've been fooled and your eyes are open. But nobody can open your eyes for you. You have to do this yourself. And you can only do it yourself if you have good friends. So you have to be an island, but not a real island. You need to have friends. And when people have seen through the illusion, the assumptions of a independent, self-existent entity, the owner of experience called me, how does that feel? Well, the analogy here is of someone who's watching a magic trick. Okay? So unless you know how that trick is performed, you can watch it again and again and again, and you never get bored. But the moment you catch the sleight of hand, you never want to watch it again. That's like nibbida. So when you see the trick, that's the ultimate truth. And I'd like to end my talk at this. So we have time for Q&A, I think.
Okay, now we're open for Q&A session. So anybody have any questions, please raise your hand. We'll pass the mic to you.
Hello, good evening. I have a question. Is that I love the idea of cultivating generosity to be a giver. I think it's a beautiful idea. But in modern society, especially at work or people around you, they're all sometimes they're all selfish. And being a general giver is not a very good idea of protecting yourself. So I really hate that feeling. I feel painful too, not being a generous person. So how could I cultivate a mind in dealing with this situation?
One of the things that I'm trying to emphasize is this is not a path where we can just take one teaching out of context and apply it. So dana and giving is also something that has to be within the larger context of this Buddhist cultivation. So the question is, what is the best way to express generosity? And if you're being generous in such a way that people are taking advantage of you. That's not dana, that's not generosity. But there are so many different ways of expressing generosity. It doesn't have to be financial. Somebody's miserable, depressed, and sit. And what's the most valuable thing that we have these days to share? It's time. And just giving some time to someone who's going through some difficulty, and being kind. And sometimes, you have this whole group of people, and everybody has this idea, I can't make myself vulnerable, or I can't give. I'd like to give, but everyone else will take advantage of me because everyone else is selfish. And in fact, you may find that actually quite a lot of people share your same kind of wishes and concerns, but it's like not the done thing to talk about that. But wisdom always has to be the guiding force and the overall trajectory of why you're doing what you're doing and what the results are, and is it something which is actually contributing to your own welfare and others or not. And there's a beautiful saying, I think it's maybe Chinese or Japanese Zen, they like the fool thinks it's better to take than to give. And the good person, the conventionally good person, thinks it's better to give than to take. And the wise person knows how to give and take. Yeah. So sometimes it's more appropriate to take, and you can often give by taking. And monks, sometimes we receive offerings and we give through that, and that's true for everyone. And sometimes it's being a good example, and it's a way of giving something to the community. You notice if you're in a group of people and everybody's kind of panicking, and there's just somebody, you only need one person who's mindful and just calm in like the still eye of the storm, and just how that can affect other people. And then that's a gift, that's an offering you give. So giving it's very profound, and there are very many ways of giving which are not necessarily making you like a prey of unscrupulous people. But I would also question your own assumptions or perceptions, whether in fact all the people around you are really like that or not, or perhaps they would prefer not to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luang Por.
Testing test.
Thank you, Luang Por, for coming to Hong Kong. We are suffering every day. Is joy a good way to combat suffering, or is it a way of do we just ignore suffering, or how do we decrease the level of suffering that we're holding in our hearts? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean the teachings of the Buddha, as I say, it's like a toolbox. There's just not one particular thing you can do. It's not like mindfulness is the thing, or joy is the thing, or gratitude is the thing. It's developing the ability to choose the tool to deal with the problems that arise. So the Buddha's team, we can summarize very simply, is that we suffer because of ignorance. And when we say ignorance, then we include cravings of various kinds, because cravings are how ignorance expresses itself in the human mind. So in the Four Noble Truths, talk about craving, but actually, if we go a step beyond that, it's avijja, or ignorance. And then true happiness, nibbana, freedom, and so on, is the result of virtues and cultivation of this integrated, systematic and comprehensive cultivation of virtues in our conduct and our emotions and in our thinking in the way. So joy is one aspect of the path, but it's. I spoke just now about finding joy in the good things you've done, but I'm kind of my person. I'm kind of lazy, and so I'm very drawn to mudita practice. You don't have to do anything. You sit back and enjoy all the goodness of other people around you. Wonderful. I mean, what a better way to enlightenment. Just appreciate goodness, even small acts of goodness and kindness. Because the more you do it, the more sensitive to goodness you become. You know, at the beginning you might say, oh, that's a really good thing to do. And then it might be just something just like somebody stumbles and somebody else puts their hand out and just catches them. Wow, that brings tears to your eyes. Because you become more and more sensitive to goodness. And so that's a wonderful part of practice. It's not going to take you all the way to end of suffering, but it can contribute to the mental qualities you need in order to find way beyond suffering. So joy also the problem about joy is you can get drunk on joy. So you need to have a wisdom faculty there also. So that every level of practice, there are always kind of, dangers and things, ways to go wrong and dead ends. So it's like it's really interesting and fun, right? The whole time, because there's always something new to deal with.
Thank you, Ajahn, for your kindness and compassion, for giving us the Dhamma talk. Now, I have 3 questions. My first question is that regarding Kalama Sutta, where the Kalamas, I always perplexed with many teaching, whether it's from Ajahns, Buddhism, Christianity, or even Islam. My question is that how do we, as a lay person, like for example in the Mangala Sutta, disassociate with fool and associate with the wise, how do we identify the Saparisa? If Ajahn could share with us your wisdom, this is the question number 1. My question number 2 is...
My memory is not...
Okay, right, thank you.
By the time you get to question number 3, I'll have forgotten question number 1 probably. Do one at a time. Okay, so... first of all, you don't always have a choice. If you've got fools in your family, you have a limited opportunity to avoid them because you have family responsibilities. So sometimes you have to deal with that. But I would say that we're not looking at, to identify, oh, that person's a fool, and we all have that foolish tendencies within us. We all have wise tendencies within us. But I think what we can see is that, and maybe you in your own relationships, there are certain people, and they're not like they're bad people. They're good people, and you kind of feel affection for them. But when you get together, you find you say nasty things you wouldn't say normally. You do stupid things you wouldn't do. And so for that person to you is a fool. And so we're taking it from what happens in your relationship with that person. And we're coming back to this very fundamental criteria of wholesome and unwholesome Dhammas. So if consistently we find that association with somebody leads to a growth of unwholesome dhammas. We find it harder to keep precepts. We find our devotion to spiritual development becoming weaker. Then that person may be a good, a kind, but for us, they're not someone that we should associate with. Whereas somebody in whose company we find we just feel elevated. You know, we talk about things and we just feel, you know, we come away from some conversation sometime and we feel really good about it. You know, and we find keeping precepts and meditating and all these things that just seem kind of normal and natural, not any kind of special kinds of things. They're very good spiritual friends. And spiritual friendship is emphasized incredibly by the Buddha. And this is the background for the title of, which I didn't really talk about very much, but this apparent contradiction between a teaching based upon self-reliance and one yet is emphasizing friendship. And those two things have to go together. So we depend on our friends to learn the skills of self-reliance. Number 2.
Right, okay. Question number 2. I think Ajahn talked about dana and sila, and that one should practice and hold the precepts. My question is this. I mean, in terms of self-respect, how do we elevate ourselves from it's still a self? How do we get it a breakthrough into no self, like the monk, right? If Ajahn can share some of your wisdom. Thank you.
Well, it's you can't jump from unwholesome to freedom from attachment. But wholesome dhammas by nature lead to, incline towards non-attachment if they are practiced correctly. So one of the ancient similes is, I don't know if you've ever been to India and you've seen like cremations. And we have a body being cremated, then you use a stick and just poking the cremated body. And by doing that, the cremated body burns, but the stick itself is burnt. And this is like wholesome dhammas are like the stick. You have to use them first. And creating wholesome perceptions are like I am a giver. That's a very skillful perception. It's not a transcendental perception. It's a convention. But the ability to create conventions, this is the genius of human beings. That we can think beyond the present moment. People are often talking about the danger of past and future, but we wouldn't be where we are now without our ability to think in terms of past and future. It's a wonderful thing if it's used correctly. So with our ability to create perceptions, like as a monk, we're taught to create what we call samana sanya. And it's a very important part of a training as a monk. And we have chants every day. I'm a monk now. I'm not a layperson. It's not appropriate for me to behave like a layperson. I live on by the generosity of others. I should conduct myself in a way that is appropriate for someone who subsists on the kindness and generosity of others. These are the kind of perceptions that monks are taught to ingrain in. But it's not like who you are ultimately. It's a path out of the more unwholesome perceptions until finally you can see the transparency of even the most wholesome perception. Number 3.
Yeah, I think following with the perception, I think there's a monk called the Bhikkhu Nyanananda. He talked about the magic of the mind. which Ajahn also referred to just now as Nibbida and disenchanted. Once you see through the trick of the magic. Wonder Ajahn could share with us some of your wisdom as to how do you actually break the tricks and that see through the mind.
You just have to keep looking.
Such as, look at what direction? Thank you.
You look at what, you don't have any choice. All you can ever know are the five khandhas. You know, other people. What do you really know of other people? You know what you've seen, what you've heard, maybe what you've smelled. I hope not. What you've experienced through the senses. And everything's the same. At the end, we always come back to our body and mind. And so we have the sensual, the consciousness of others, let's say if we're talking about others, and then we have our perceptions and interpretations and our thoughts and emotions. But everything, our whole life is always nothing more than the five khandhas. And so we're always coming back to the five khandhas arising and passing away. This is how we see through the assumptions we have. You know, I like to share the very first Buddhist book I ever read, and it was one of the best ones. And the author was making a very good point that we are often fooled by the conventions that we adopt. And but in particular, the conventions of language. So in most languages, you know, we have a subject, an object, a verb, and we assume that can be superimposed on reality. That's how things work. And he gave an example, a counterexample of a sentence. Say, it is raining. So the subject of that sentence grammatically is it. But the question is, what is the it which is raining? You see, so our grammar demands that we have a subject, but in reality there's not this thing it which is raining. There's not rain which is raining. And this is the same with our life. We have physical reality, the body. We have feelings, we have perceptions, we have thoughts, we have emotions, we have sense consciousness, but we superimpose on those phenomena this word I. I am this, I am that, I feel this, I think this, I want this, and because we use this word I again and again and again, we quite naturally assume that it refers to something that actually exists. And the I that we assume to be the subject of experience is like the it, you know, which we say is raining. So this is why it's just a matter of looking and observing again, what's really going on.
Thank you, Ajahn, for your talk. I have a question because you mentioned about being able to give and take. I'm better at giving and not very good at, usually when people are kind to me, I have difficulty to open my heart and accept that. And then I often feel like, if someone being very kind to me, I will have a feeling like, not being good enough to accept it, and then I will feel overwhelmed and I want to pull distance from that person, even though that person may be very kind. I was just thinking about what is your advice on develop that? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there are some phrases which are so stupid excuse me, and destructive, and people use so freely. And the phrase that I'm referring to is not good enough. What does that mean? I don't know what does not good enough mean? How can you be not good enough? It's a meaningless phrase. Don't use it anymore. Okay. No need. You can express yourself far better than that. Okay, you feel embarrassed if somebody gives you something. But it's receiving things, and that person, what does that person expect? I mean, I have this with monks, like Western monks, and they feel in Thailand get a lot of respect and a lot of offerings, and sometimes they feel, I have so many defilements, and I feel like the people who are offering, they have less defilements than I do. It's not, and I say to the monks, yeah, but they're not expecting you to be an enlightened being. The deal, if you like, is that you keep the precepts of a Buddhist monk. That's the bottom line. And for Buddhist lay people, if you are living in the form of a Buddhist monk with sincerity and keeping precepts, then people are happy with that. That's correct. And so if you're receiving something and you're not trying to cheat them and deceive them and fool them, I don't think that's the case, is it? So those people, you respect their judgment. They want to give you something, and it gives them joy to do that. So you're saying, have I behaved in any way which might be termed dishonest in trying to gain some kind of advantage from those persons? No. Therefore, it's good. It's kind. It's a beautiful thing, and when I was young, my preferred mode of transport was hitchhiking. I love hitchhiking because I like the uncertainty of it, and I like the fact you don't know how far you're going to go one day. It could be 50 kilometers or 500 kilometers, and you could be, nothing short of. So I really like that. But then, so many of the people who pick you up in those days, it's not so common these days, they say, I used to do what you're doing. And so many people treated me with kindness and picked me up. I decided whenever I have enough money to have a car, I'm going to do that for them. So whenever people are kind to you, then strengthen that. People have been so kind to me. When I have money, when I have the opportunity to help others, then I'll do that. And so it's a beautiful thing, because it's giving you that motivation to be a better person and a kinder and more generous person yourself. So it's how you consider it, how you frame what's going on. That's not there in the act itself. It's in your wisdom and your understanding how you can consider that, how you can appreciate it in such a way that you feel good and that person feels good.
Thank you for sharing today. My question is rather specific, since I'm still an undergraduate student in Hong Kong U, and since I was in primary school, I'm not good at study. However, in my life up till now, my value is always judged by my performance in school. So I'm always feel like I'm lack of value, and also I feel like I'm not competitive in the future when I'm going to find a job. So every day I felt very stressful and painful, and I was driven by my stress to do all the things. So I was wondering if, under the judgment of this world, I'm always at the back. What should I do to find the peace in my heart and get rid of the feeling of out of control and everything? Thank you.
Yeah, generally it's not very skillful to try to get rid of things. Yeah. It tends to make it worse. Okay. So generally any kind of discomfort, physical pain, mental pain, what are you studying?
I'm majoring in finance, asset management, private banking.
Okay. Why is that funny? Okay. Well, there's a formula. Okay. There's a mathematical formula. Pain multiplied by resistance to pain equals suffering. So you can experience physical or mental pain, but if you, the less resistance you have towards it, the less suffering you have. But you can have a small amount of physical, mental pain and a lot of resistance. I don't want this in my life, go away, and you can suffer a lot. And if you have no resistance at all, you can have pain without any suffering at all. But who you are is not a function of your performance or your IQ or your exam results. I mean, why would you think that? Those are just the outward trappings of your life. That's not who you are as a human being. And all you need to do is just close your eyes and meditate on your breath coming in and coming out. Within a few breaths, where has that all gone? Even the fact of being who your name and your personal history, and the fact that you're a woman, or the fact that you're a student, where's it gone? And if it was so absolutely real, how could it disappear so easily? And all this sense of who you are, and all your weaknesses or foibles and so on, you throw that away every day for 8 or 9 hours without worrying about it at all. It's called sleep. So, a third of your life, you're not that person anyway. So in my understanding of what employers are looking for in graduates these days, given the incredible changes taking place through development of AI, for example, then what were formerly called the soft skills are now becoming the hard skills. Employers want people who love to learn. So whatever your actual performance is, that's not necessarily a function of that passion for learning. And that passion for learning and love just to see, you're understanding things you didn't understand before, developing skills you didn't have before, should be complemented and allied with skill in learning. So it's not just a love of learning, you need study skills, and you observe yourself how, when you find you learn things more easily, what's really going, why is it sometimes it's very hard to learn things? Learning and observing. So we've gone way beyond that period where people are having a single career for the whole of their working life. You'll probably have so many careers in your life, and many of them don't even exist yet. Yeah. So you can't, do a degree and think that's going to decide your future. It won't. It's not going to. And in financial world, it may be within 2 or 3 years, AI is doing all that better than human beings, cheaper than human beings, faster than human beings. And that's probably 90% likely. So what I want you to appreciate from your university career is how you've learned how to learn, and you. I hope you developed that passion for learning, and you developed skills in learning, and you have an adaptability and a patience and endurance and resilience all these kinds of qualities, this is what will guarantee or at least give you a good chance at having a productive working life. It's not bound up completely in your exam results. It's the qualities you're developing within yourself which will enable you to survive and flourish in a world which is changing in ways that nobody can predict.
Tanner Jiang, there's a written question. So from this lady or gentleman, you say, "Greetings, Ajahn. When one practices Brahma Vihara, and if they reach the Brahma Loka, is that the same destination for those who practice the Brahma Vihara without Buddhist teachings? For example, Brahma Viharas based on the Hindu teachings are different from the Buddhist teachings."
I don't. As far as I'm aware, there's not a specific Brahma Vihara teaching in the Hindu tradition, but the Buddha adapted this, borrowed, can say, the word Brahma to refer to this cultivation of these four virtues. What is unique to the Buddhist development is that these four qualities are seen to be connected, and specifically the fourth quality of upekkha is crucial to development of Brahmaviharas. So in the many different categories of groups of teachings, 4s and 5s and 6s and 7s and so on, there will almost always be a word which is, if not wisdom itself, will be a representative or an aspect of wisdom. And in the Brahmaviharas, upekkha is the wisdom aspect. So in the development of metta, so you may have a very wonderful, expansive wish for all beings to be happy, but you may be very limited in your ability to actually produce any or create any happiness in the world, because people have karma, and some people are just not ripe to be helped. People don't want to be helped, or people don't trust you, or don't believe in your goodwill. There are so many different possibilities and obstacles to expressing loving kindness and compassion in the world. And upekkha is the recognition of the fact that we have our own karma, that we are the result, we are the inheritors of our karma. And so our own good, pure wishes are not enough. So the four Brahmaviharas are practiced together in harmony, and because they are kind of without boundaries, then the kind of mental states that arise can be the cause for rebirth in Brahma realms. But that's not the goal of these Brahmaviharas. They are foundation, they are paths towards the Buddhist liberation. Because whether it's heaven realms or Brahma realms, from Buddhist point of view, they're just basically like high-class resorts. They're a place to go for a holiday. But this is the best place to do the real work of Buddhist practice. And it is possible in some heaven realms that there are sotapannas and teachers there who can help devas to realize Dhamma, but it's the pleasure and the delights of deva realms mostly overwhelm people, and they're not really open to Dhamma. But as human beings, we have quite a good mix of pleasure and pain, and enable us to really progress on the path of Dhamma. So, aspiring to rebirth in a heaven realm or a Brahma realm is legitimate. It's not something that the Buddha condemned, but he praised going beyond that, setting one's sights higher than that.
Okay. Thank you, Ajahn, for your sharing. So speaking of karma, we have a traditional Chinese saying that good people will have good karma, or we have good things in return. But in reality, we can see many good people who is still experiencing misfortune. And sometimes it's really hard to reconcile that. So can you share some wisdom on how we can view on that and, reduce the miserable feelings for others?
Well, first of all, good karma, the karma is the action, okay?
Sorry.
So it's the volitional action expressed through body, speech, or mind. Okay. And that will always have a good result. But how that is experienced in a life is not a sure thing. Some good karma is experienced in the present life, some in the next life, and some in future lives. And we also are receiving the fruits of karma from the past. But to give an analogy, let's suppose there's a river, and on one bank of the river there are factories releasing acid into the water, which does what to the pH level? Goes down. Okay, and on the other, sorry, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm not a scientist either, but I know this much. So on the other bank of the river, all these factories, and they're releasing alkaline into the river. Okay, so what will be the pH level of the river? Very hard to calculate, but what we do know is every time a factory releases acid into the water, the pH level will reduce. How much is very difficult to say, because there may be a factory on the other side of the river which is releasing far more alkaline into the water. So if you can imagine this incredibly long river with all these different factories all releasing effluents into the river which are affecting the pH level. And this is somewhat similar to what goes on in our life. But nothing is lost. That's the main thing. Everything has an effect. And one of my favorite blessings I give myself, and the Buddha said, is may you have a smooth ride over the bumpy road of life. So, like, most people think that, like, making a lot of merit, doing a lot of good things, you deserve, like, a smooth road. That's not what the Buddha said. Everyone has a bumpy road, but you can have a smooth ride over the bumpy road, with the practice of Dhamma.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. My question is that we learned that the world is actually the phenomenon is the concept we created by our minds, conscious. But I wonder why this world is created like this. Why we have suffer. Why we have like and dislike. And originally, where we come from. So why this world can not be just like no suffering and we can just say things as it is?
Mm-hmm. Well, you kind of begged the question there, which means you included a conclusion in the question, and using the word created. Why was the word created like this? Well, it wasn't. Okay. Is there anything, can you think of anything in your experience or in the history of the world that was created from nothing? when we, like, everything we have is just taking raw materials and changing the form of them. But there's no beginning. You know, the components of this watch we can trace back at least to the Big Bang. And before Big Bang didn't come out of anything. So the Buddha could remember 91 eons, past lives. You think about that, not 2 or 3 past lives. So 1 eon, how long is 1 eon? So the Buddha said, imagine a stone mountain, which is 1 yojana long, say 12 kilometers long, 12 kilometers wide, 12 kilometers high. Once every 100 years, a bird flies by with a silk scarf in its beak, and it brushes against the stone mountain. How long would it take for that silk scarf to erode the stone mountain until nothing is left? That's 1 eon. And the Buddha could remember 91 eons. And the Buddha said, I can remember 91 eons, and I've never discovered a first beginning of things. So the question is, why do we think that there has to be a creator or a creation or a beginning when we have no experience? Nobody's ever had any experience of a beginning from nothing. All we have ever experienced is transformations. So this idea of that there's something before this, or why is the world, it's like this. It's just like this. But what we can say is that the suffering or the happiness is not predestined. It's not some God punishing us or rewarding us or testing us. There's not some divine plan. What's going on is that there is ignorance in the human heart and defilements which arise dependent upon that ignorance, and those defilements can be abandoned through practice of the Eightfold Path. So this is the challenge Buddha gave us, to see whether or not that's true. And so the ultimate goal of Buddhism is Nibbana. So what's that? Well, I mean, can't really talk about that, can we? But what we can talk about is the people, the human beings, beginning with the Buddha himself, who realized Nibbana. So we can talk about what is the mind, the human mind, that has realized Nibbana like. And then we can talk about that, because we can see in the Buddha that he had unlimited wisdom, unlimited compassion, unlimited purity of heart. So although we can't say what Nibbana is, we can say how the experience of Nibbana is manifested in a human being. Absolutely boundless wisdom and compassion and purity and freedom. So that's the Buddhist goal. And so we don't have to get all those ideas, why is this like that? And what we can say is, can we increase the amount of wisdom in our life, the amount of compassion in our life, the freedom from defilement in our life? And that's something we can do, and something we can experience for ourselves. Everything else is just speculation, and it doesn't go anywhere. It just goes around in circles.
So we still have tiny bit of time, so we can take one last questions.
Thank you. I feel very extremely lucky to ask you the last question. So I'm a student in marketing and psychology, and I'm very passionate about promoting mental health, and I think Buddhism is one of the most promising pathway in the future, especially in the age of AI. But I find it incredibly hard to integrate Buddhism practice into people's lives, including myself. My life is I practice Buddhism like meditation for a long time, always on and off, and lots of time entangled with life. And then I've dropped a lot of sessions, and it's just like on and off, and for maybe 6 or 7 years. And I have to come to a session like this to remind myself to come back to the practice. So I think it's for a lot of people, it's the same for them as well. So I would like to ask you how you see Buddhism, Buddhist practice integrated into people's lives in the future. Thank you.
Well, the underlying practice, which is present both in formal meditation and in daily life, is what we call the four right efforts. So in the case of a meditation practice, you have a meditation object, like the breath, for example, and your first challenge is, how can I create a relationship with my meditation object in such a way that defilements will not enter my mind? That's the first challenge. Given the fact that's very difficult, the second challenge is, in the case that defilement or hindrances do enter my mind, how can I let go of them? The third thing we're trying to do in meditation is to bring into the mind wholesome qualities which are not yet apparent, beginning with mindfulness and clear comprehension, going on to jhana factors and enlightenment factors. And the fourth effort is, when these wholesome qualities have started to manifest, how do we take care of them? How do we bring them to maturity? So this is the practice of Buddhist meditation in terms of four right efforts. In daily life, it's exactly the same. Whether you're alone or whether you're with family or whether you're at work or study, you're making these efforts. How can I protect my mind? Again, to prevent unwholesome mental states from arising in my mind. When they have arisen, how can I deal with them? If I get angry or stressed out or I'm jealous or whatever it might be, how do I deal with that? What are the good qualities that I can bring into my mind here and now? And what are the good qualities that are present that I need to take care of? So, for instance, say you're driving to work, and you say, what are the kind of defilements that tend to arise driving to work? Get upset with selfish drivers. Okay, that's my challenge. That's my spiritual challenge. So I'm going to drive to work and protect my mind and not allow anger and irritation with jealous drivers, with selfish drivers from arising. So in terms of the actual techniques you're using, then that might vary. You need a toolbox of techniques. It might be loving kindness meditation, for example. You're in a meeting, let's say. Okay, this is not a time where you're going to be able to look at your breath. So what do? What is the practice in a meeting? Well, you want to be able to contribute. So what are the two things that you need to do in a meeting? One is listen, and one is speak. So how can I be a good listener? What are the things that are obstacles to being a good listener? I tend to pay more attention to people I like than people I don't like. I give more weight to the opinions of people I respect than people I don't respect. So that's something I can work on, to try to give respect and interest and keep focused on the words and the opinions of people that I don't like. Need to be patient. When you're speaking, okay, what are the things that tend to come? Self-consciousness, worrying whether people respect what you say or interested in what you say or like you, and all these things that can come up. This is what Dhamma practice is about. whatever's going on right now, that's your practice. What's the wisest way to deal with whatever you're dealing with right now? And using all the tools that the Buddha gave us to deal in the best possible way with whatever is happening right now.
Great. Thank you, Ajahn, for the inspiring talk. Please join me to give Ajahn 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you.